Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for checking out my YouTube channel today, The Study of Antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I'm your host, Nick Barksdale, and today we are joined once again by a very special guest, a very awesome YouTube channel that I'm happy to be affiliated with, and that is World History by a Jew, none other than Seth Fleishman. Seth, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks, Nick. It's a pleasure to be back again.
And before we jump into this, I've got a few questions to ask because I know your YouTube channel is really starting to grow. You're doing some awesome content. People are really excited for your work. But with a channel expansion, one thing we notice is that there's always going to be some flack, right? And so World History by a Jew, my question is, do you, now that you're growing in popularity, have you noticed a rise in, like, let's say, anti-Semitic comments?
Unfortunately, yes. I can't say it's completely a surprise, but it's disappointing. I'll say when we first met, my subscriber base was really just people from my synagogue and maybe a few people from my community. We're talking like less than 100, like 80 people or so the first time we interviewed. And I knew as we expanded that there's a great thing about reaching a greater audience, but also you start meeting other personalities that you may not have a personal connection with. So let's just say for my community, it then expanded to now I have subscribers from all over the US, all over Canada, subscribers from Israel. And if I haven't mentioned your country and your subscriber, then tell me, because I'd like to know. But I know at least from those three countries I have it covered. And so what does that mean in terms of anti-Semitism? Well, most of it are comments that it can be emails. Typically it's comments on YouTube, but it's stuff you can just roll your eyes, like, all Jews should be killed. I had a guy, one of the most recent ones was, why do you call it World History by a Jew? Because all history is written by Jews. What was it? Another good one. Jews shouldn't be allowed to post on YouTube because they'll corrupt it like everything else. These type comments. Those are fine. And like I said, you just roll your eyes and hit delete. The harder ones are what I would call the educated anti-Semites. And maybe someone would say that's an oxymoron, but what I mean are people who have done some research and perhaps taken legitimate research and use it to back up an anti-Semitic point of view. If I had to say what separates it, almost always those type emails or comments include a quote from Professor Israel Finkelstein. And he's a Israeli archaeologist, but he's many of his public comments have talked about how, that the Bible is completely made up and Jews came in a lot longer, and he's welcome to his opinion, his research. I'm not saying he should be censored. What I'm saying is his comments are then turned around by anti-Semites to be, Jews shouldn't be in the Holy Land. It's really the Palestinians. Why are Jews there? Jewish people don't really exist. And it's just all made up, and Dr. Finkelstein proves it. And these sort of comments are a little bit harder to take than just the easy ones that I hit delete.
So when people reach out to you via email, what kind of reactions do you usually get?
I would say, so we've talked about anti-Semitism. I want to leave that topic. I just want to talk about the positive feedback that I get. So most of it is legitimate questions. The hateful comments are few and far between, really. It's mainly legitimate questions. I'd say about a third are religious related, and I mean that from any religion, but about a third of them are religious related, and then about 2/3 are secular questions. The majority of my content, although some lectures can vary, the majority of my content is secular, right? I only touch on the Jewish aspects. I usually don't focus on it except for a couple of choice lectures. So because of that, that's where the questions come from. Now, I do get rabbinical questions, and by that I mean someone asked me a marriage question one time. I get asked about scriptural interpretation. Some people want to have a disputation, this sort of thing, and I steer away from that. I'm not a rabbi, nor do I pretend to be. It's fun, but I just tell them that's not really my department. They need to go to someone else.
That being said, if y'all ever have questions, you want to pick his brain on a certain historical topic, don't hesitate to reach out to him. He's a really open, friendly guy, and he'd be happy to answer you as best as he can. So let's talk about where you're going. So hit us with some ideas you've got coming about what we can expect to come from you in the future when it comes to content.
I have at least 2 more Bronze Age collapse lectures. That's already proven to be popular, and it's also helped with not only my own channel, but interacting with your channel as well, Nick. So I like doing Bronze Age collapse. It's a very interesting topic. It's just you've covered so much. It's hard for me to find angles you haven't covered, but I've got a couple on the way. So more really about the Sea Peoples and how the Sea Peoples are in the Bible. You've talked about the Philistines, but I want to take the Philistines from a more biblical angle. So that's coming. In addition, there are other Sea Peoples that are listed in the Bible if you don't realize it. There's actually one group that may have married into a Jewish tribe, so that's coming. And there are others that say are further to the north in the land of Canaan that the Bible calls Philistines, but they weren't, and we can identify who these people were. I'm not giving you the details because I want you to go see the lecture. I said a couple more, but these things seem to change, right? It's a little bit, these lectures are a little bit artistry. I mean, I have the artistic ability of a rock, but nonetheless, there's still a little bit of artistry involved, and they kind of write themselves. Like this whole Bronze Age collapse in the Bible was supposed to be one lecture, and then it became a 3-part series, and now it's a 5-part series. So, I don't exactly know what direction I'll go. But what I really wanted to do is move on to something completely different. After I finished Bronze Age collapse, I've kind of gotten pigeonholed into being an expert on antiquity, which is wonderful. I'm very, it's complimentary, but on the other hand, I'm like a equal opportunity historian. I'll take history from any time, any place. And so I've been in this one area around the Eastern Mediterranean now this whole time. And it's time for me to move to a different time and a different place, maybe Jews in colonial America or Jews in the Roman Empire or something thereabouts. I'm still trying to decide, as you can tell, but I got a few weeks before I need to make that decision.
That'll be absolutely fantastic. Honestly, I know I can't wait, and especially for those other Bronze Age collapse episodes. We all know that I definitely enjoy my collapse, so that'll be excellent. I can't wait. And definitely to my audience, again, definitely check out the links in the video description below. They will take you to his channel to where you can explore all the hard work that he does and really take advantage of everything that he has to offer.
Hi, welcome back to World History by a Jew. I'm your host, Seth Fleishman. We are back with a special lecture today. This one was requested by Nick Barksdale. He came to me with the idea of whether finding the evidence of the Bronze Age collapse in the Bible would be worthy of a lecture, and his idea has actually become an entire series. So the series name is The Bible and the Bronze Age Collapse, so that's also the name of this particular lecture. Our last couple lectures we're giving you the tools to analyze the biblical tradition with the Bronze Age collapse archaeology. This is the lecture that I put it together, lay out the bullet points. This is how you can analyze the Bible and the Bronze Age collapse together. And then this will be our jumping off point for the next couple lectures after that. But this one should be a lot of fun. And without further ado, let's get started. So remember, overall, in this entire series, we are going through the question in our head, is the Bronze Age collapse in the Bible? And not only am I presenting why it's in the Bible, but you'll be able to say so yourself after this. This is a lecture where you're really going to start seeing all the pieces come together. Now, we're going to first do a summary of what the world, or at least the Eastern Mediterranean, looked like after the Bronze Age collapse. And then we're going to start focusing on the land of Canaan. So our last lecture was on Egypt, but now we're really going to zero in on the land of Canaan, and we're going to start off looking at maps. So we're going to look at about 300 years of the history of Canaan through maps, and then we're going to put that together with what we know through archaeology, that what the land of Canaan looked like in a societal sense after the collapse. From there, that will then have what we need to take the biblical tradition, the biblical record, and mesh that with everything else we've learned up to this date. Number 5 here is going to be a little bit controversial, because for probably the most common comment I got after the Exodus lecture was, oh no, you have it all wrong. Exodus couldn't be in the 1200s. It must have been in the 1400s or 1500s BCE. After you see this lecture tonight and see how the Bronze Age collapse affected the biblical tradition, you will be able to see that, oh, wait, it couldn't have been the 1400s. It couldn't have been the 1500s. The 1200s makes a lot more sense. So we will be concluding tonight with me answering the question, Seth, just give me a straight answer. Is the Bronze Age collapse in the Bible? And I believe you will emphatically be able to say, yes, it was, after seeing this lecture this evening. Let's jump right in. We ended our last lecture with this slide, and it's going to be kind of our staging ground for tonight's lecture. So there's a few important points I want to emphasize before we move on. So after the Sea People's invasion was over and Ramses III led Egypt to victory, things were changed. The world wasn't the same anymore. Their world wasn't the same anymore. So the Sea Peoples now had been settled in the land of Canaan. They now are now part of buffer states that have been set up to prevent future invasions. And so we see in the records how, particularly around the coast of Canaan, you now have these Sea Peoples in their own kingdoms that are being set up. Egypt now is going to be at peace for a little while, at least relative to Egyptian history, but their world has collapsed. All their allies are gone. Egypt's great international trade is decimated. Now, I don't think there was ever a point there was no trade whatsoever, but it certainly was only a fraction of what it was before. And Egypt's economy is in shambles, right? They've been fighting these defensive wars, not wars of conquest, or not when in a war of conquest, you can bring in new wealth. In a war of defense, you're just trying to save your neck, and that's expensive. So the Egyptian might, what I mean by that is Egypt survives, but it's never the superpower it was before the Sea People's invasion. Their greatest era is over. Now I want to look at what happened to the region. All right, so what's the result of the Sea People's invasion, the Bronze Age collapse? How does this change the region, the Eastern Mediterranean? So as I mentioned, their allies are gone. So the great powers, the Mycenaeans, the Hittites, we know there'd be a Neo-Hittite empire a couple hundred years down the road. We'd have the classic Greek world rise a couple hundred years down the road. But for now, it's really just Egypt that's the last man standing here in the Eastern Mediterranean. So we have destruction of many cities and city-states, Ugarit, Kadesh, Aleppo, Troy, Mycenae, Knossos. So a lot of destruction throughout both what's now Greece and what's now Turkey, what's now Lebanon and Syria. And then you move into the land of Canaan to what's now modern Israel. And Ashdod was destroyed, Ashkelon, Akko, Hazor, Megiddo. So the world is definitely different now. And then you take these Sea Peoples, these new Sea Peoples that are settling in the neighborhood. And then I mentioned in the previous lecture that we have, it could be debated a little bit, but we have 9 named Sea Peoples that I have listed. And about half of these guys are going to end up settling in the land of Canaan. And the Philistines being the most prominent, the Philistines will be the first one everyone picks. And so we're going to be talking about the Philistines just a little bit tonight. The next lecture is completely focusing on the Philistines. And then the lecture after that will cover some of the other Sea Peoples that settled in the land of Canaan that you may not even have realized they were Sea Peoples. You may not even realize they were there. So in the end, the Philistines and these other Sea Peoples will play a prominent role in the Bible. And now we're going to move into that. I'm going to show you how they do. And for that, I need some maps. We have 3 maps we're looking at tonight. Number 1 is from around 1400, probably more 1450, 1400 BCE. This shows Mitanni when Mitanni was rather powerful. You can see the Hittites were much less so, but still notice Egypt is completely in control of the land of Canaan, and really in this case, modern Lebanon as well. Now we're going to jump forward about 100 years and look in 1320. By the way, this would have been think like Thutmose the third in this era. Now let's move on to the 1300s. And in the 1300s, we're now looking, okay, Egypt doesn't go quite as far north. They're now sharing modern Lebanon with the Hittites. Mitanni is now tiny. It's the Hittites who've grown tremendously in the last 100 years. And Egypt still has most of what they had before, which includes all of modern Israel. Now I want to look at this third map, which isn't quite 100 years later. Maybe it's 60, 70 years later. This right here is a map of the early campaigns of Ramses the Great. And this is really only showing Israel, what's now modern Israel, with some of Lebanon as well. But what I want to show you is how many campaigns, years 4, years 5, years 8, years 10, how many campaigns Ramses the Great has. He's completely covering all of Israel and fighting anyone who gets in his way. Now, I want to cross that map with a very Jewish one, and that is the Israelite penetration into the land of Canaan. So if you see here this red square, just look at Jerusalem to get your bearings. And then here's Jerusalem here. So this is the area of Israelite penetration right in the center of where this past action was to the Egyptians. So what I'm saying is, what I want you to get out of this, the great powers, particularly Egypt, completely dominated the land of Canaan from the mid-1400s all the way up until the Bronze Age collapse. Okay. Now I want to look at a couple more maps. This is where we're gonna bring it together for what we learn in the Bible. So after these powers collapse, there is a power vacuum that opens the door for new settlers. All right, the settlers were all most important. That's all most important for us are the Israelites. So here's that same little block of Israelite conquest. So the Israelites come in just north of the Dead Sea and north of Jerusalem, and this is kind of their initial area of entry. So through these central highlands, this is a mountainous area. It's through these central highlands that the Israelites first come in. Now, archaeology shows that shortly after 1200 BCE, about 250 settled little villages, but about 250 new villages spring up in this area, the same exact area we're told the Jews came in, the same exact time of Israelite penetration, shortly after 1200 BCE. So that's really neat stuff right there. In addition to is the Philistines. So I want you to look here. The Philistines would come down here and form the Pentapolis. The Pentapolis is Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Gath, and Ekron. So this area right here becomes Philistia. Now Philistia is going to eventually give Canaan the name Palestine, which we'll cover next time. But the point I want to make is this did not happen until about 1175 BCE. Let's go back to our last lecture. Or 2 lectures ago, we had the Merneptah Stela. We dated his invasion of Ashkelon. Remember, Merneptah fought Canaanites, not Philistines, in Ashkelon in around 1210 BCE. But by 1175 BCE, the Philistines were moving to Ashkelon. So it's within like less than a generation, or maybe a generation, you have this changeover from Canaanite rulers to Philistine rulers. So that also is very important for our timing due to the connectedness of the Philistines in the Bible. Let me remind you, the Philistines are mentioned over 250 times in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so that's more than a couple times, but they couldn't have come in until this point in time. Finally, I want to mention a few other kingdoms that are less talked about, but let me get rid of that to show you this map. These 3 kingdoms, which are also biblically important, they also were faced by the Israelites shortly before they penetrated into the land of Canaan. None of these guys existed before the 1200s BCE. Some of the people may have been in the area, but the kingdoms were all found. These 3 kingdoms, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, were all founded in the 1200s and 1100s BCE, which is very important for dating the Israelite conquest. So what I'm saying is, when all these powers, regional powers, were gone, it created a vacuum in these lands, and it allowed new people and new kingdoms to come up. Most specifically the Israelites and the Philistines, but others as well. All right, so both the timing and the geography of the Bronze Age collapse is very important for us analyzing the historicity of the Bible. Okay, now what I want to do, we have some new information, and I want to take this new information and bring it back to what we learned before about the Exodus.
All right, so this slide should look familiar to most of you, especially anyone who saw the Exodus lecture or the Merneptah one. I went in great detail over these points. And I've also briefed in other lectures on top of that. So I'm not going to go to the full detail, but I do just want to give a rundown for those of you who are seeing this list for the first time. So in short, the Torah clearly states that Jews helped to build Pi-Ramses, the city of Pi-Ramses. Pi-Ramses only existed from 1280 BCE to 1060 BCE. So that gives you all of a 220-year window. Now Ramses the Great, somewhere around his 20 to 25th years of his reign, something changed in him. He was definitely a different king afterwards. I understand that's not as hard as the other dates I'm giving, but we're going to factor that in as well. The Torah states the Jews wandered in the desert for about 40 years. And number 5, the Merneptah Stela tells us that the people of Israel, not the country, the people of Israel were in Canaan about 1210 BCE to definitely before 1208 BCE, but somewhere right around there. Now, if you mix all that in a pot, you're going to get a range for the Exodus from about 1270 to 1235 BCE. And really, just looking a little bit closer at these numbers, you can narrow that down to about 1260 to 1245 BCE. So you got your 15-year window there. Now, for the sake of simplicity, as we get through the rest of this lecture, instead of saying 1260 to 1245 every time, I'm just going to say 1250 BCE, but just know I'm saying about 1250 BCE. I'm not saying it's that exact. And again, if you want to know more about this dating, then just see either the Exodus lecture or its follow-up, the oldest hymn of Jews, and that'll put you in on the details. All right, now what I want to do is take this date range we've just established, and we're going to compare it with both rabbinical dating and other Bible commentators. And this is where I'm really going to drill into this point about people thinking the Exodus could have occurred in 1400s or 1500s BCE. We're gonna take a much closer look at that now. The most common scripture dating outside of rabbinical dating is this, and it may fluctuate a few years here or there, but basically biblical dating outside of rabbinical tradition adds up the years in the Bible as such, and they come to the conclusion that the Exodus must have been like 1450 to 1500 BCE, somewhere in there. All right, and I'm not going to go through these calculations because, quite frankly, I don't agree with them. But I wanted to give you the comparison so you can see that this is how people are coming up with this idea that the Bible tells that the Exodus was in 1450 BC or thereabouts. Notice there's already a difference in the beginning where if you look at rabbinical dating, and y'all have seen me use this chart a couple times in these lectures, Abraham was born in 1813 BCE. In Jewish tradition, already see here it's 2166 BC. So you have a difference from the very beginning. And whereas they're dating Exodus at 1446, 1450 BCE, we dated at 1313 BCE. Now, I understand 1313 isn't 1250, but just to give you an idea, that's only about 60 years difference. 60 years difference over 3,300 years is about 1.5%. So 1.5% margin of error doesn't sound too bad. But anyway, I'm not really using either system. I'm focusing more on what the archaeology tells us. I feel the archaeology tells us it's about 1250 BCE. Now, I'm putting an X there because I don't want you to look at it anymore. You're now forbidden to use that chart from now on. It's done. You never saw it. But what I really want to get to is there are two options for the start of Israelite conquest. There's one saying it was around 1250 BC, plus you have 40 years of wandering the desert, which gives us a conquest of 1210 BC. We have another of 1450 BCE, 40 years of wandering, 1410. So I want to compare the 1210 BCE and 1410 BCE to what we know from the Bible. And now we're going to mesh that with the Bronze Age collapse. So this is our last slide for tonight, although I'm going to do a few things with the slide. We're now closing in on the end. So here's kind of our grand finale. I'm pulling out the big fireworks. The Israelite conquest was possible only after the Bronze Age collapse. So I'm about to prove that to you if I haven't already. All right. Number one, Egypt, as I showed you in the maps, completely dominated the land of Canaan from Thutmose III in the mid-1400s up until Ramses II towards the end of the 1200s BCE.
all right? They had complete control of the land of Canaan. And they kept excellent records. We see repeated invasions in Egypt, and they always list every city they fight. They always list every people they fight, but it wasn't until 1210 BCE or thereabouts that Merneptah had to face the people of Israel. Merneptah gives us the absolute earliest record of the Israelites, and this isn't just Egypt. This is the Hittites. This is Mitanni. We have the hundreds of Amarna letters, never mention Israel, and they're focused on Israel. They're focused on Canaan all the time. They never mention Israelites. They do mention Habiru, so you got to look at my lecture on that if you want to know about the Habiru. They do not mention the Israelites in hundreds of letters involving Canaan. And finally, you have Ugarit, who I told you was like the Venice, who had this great core of communication. It was destroyed in 1180 BCE. It also never mentioned Israel, which tells you something. If you put all this together, they probably weren't there before 1210 BCE. That's kind of how it all comes together. Now, all right, so I want to look at the reverse. Who rules Canaan in the Bible? Right? The Bible doesn't say the Egyptians were ruling Canaan. It doesn't say the Hittites are ruling Canaan, right? It doesn't mention the Ugarit, right? If the conquest was earlier than 1200 BCE, Jews would have repeatedly sparred with Egypt. They would have had fight after fight after fight with the Egyptians. They did not. They had fight after fight after fight with the Philistines. So it had to happen after the Philistines were there. The fact that they don't mention Egypt and the Hittites in the Bible, that omission is a huge clue to timing the entire process. I want to mention a few other points here. The Sea Peoples destroyed the Canaanite coast. So when they destroyed all these cities, they also destroyed all the powers that could have taken control, right? So Ugarit was a pretty powerful city. If it wasn't destroyed, maybe it would have taken over the land of Canaan when all these great powers were gone. But it was destroyed by the Sea Peoples. So not only did the Jews have God on their side, they also had the Sea Peoples destroying all these people before they had to face them. Also, the iron weapons. This is more from the last lecture, but I'm kind of combining both lectures here. The Israelites were facing iron weapons when they invaded. Well, iron weapons weren't common practice until around the Bronze Age collapse. Another important dating clue. Now, the Philistines did not come in until 1175 BC, which I kind of already said because I got on my high, but just know that this 1175 BC is a pretty firm date. Maybe it's 1178, someone may argue 1180, but somewhere thereabouts is when the Philistines started settling in Ashkelon. Now, we then talked about the other kingdoms, the less mentioned kingdoms, but they are listed in the Bible that the early Israelites were facing, Edom, Moab, and Ammon, all circa 1200, 1100 BC. And finally, we had, because there was no imperial control, the Jews were able to found some 250 plus villages in the central highlands. So you had, right, if you have all these new people moving into the land of Canaan, they got to have a place to live. So this then answers the question, where could new migrants moving into the area live? Well, one of these 250 new villages that did not exist before. So for those who think that the Jews were there earlier, I think this gives you an astronomical amount of information as to why they could not have been there earlier than the 1200s. And if you still think they're there in the 1400s, what in the world do you think they were doing for 200 years? Okay, so let me summarize. What does the Bronze Age collapse teach us? It gives us a unique time and place for Exodus to occur and the Israelite conquest to occur about 40 years later, right? We have no more major powers in Canaan. We have no previous diplomatic record of the Jews before the 1200s. We had Sea Peoples cleared a lot of the regional powers. We had to have the Iron Revolution to have iron to be in the biblical stories. The Philistines and the neighboring kingdoms didn't exist until after the Bronze Age collapse. And finally, you have these new villages to live. All of this came together in a very small window of time. So let's go back to our original question. Is the Bronze Age collapse in the Bible? Not only is it in the Bible, I believe it very well helps prove the historicity of the biblical story. You couldn't do much better than that with the information I've given you tonight. Okay, so next lecture, I have more controversy and more fights for you. Who were the real Philistines? Are today's Palestinians the same as the ancient Philistines? What does the archaeology even match the Bible? What can DNA tell us? And should we be calling it Palestine or should we be calling it Israel? All right, I think that's enough controversy for us all for one evening, right? If you enjoyed this video, please like it. And also, if you want to know about more videos, please subscribe to my channel. I do have a weekly email. Don't worry, it's only one email a week. If you'd like to get it, at this point, I'd like to open the floor for questions.